Would you consider yourself a hero? And if not, then why not? I mean, what is a hero after all? Well, for starters, we can all agree that a hero is one who acts heroically. Which begs the question, of course, what is a heroic act anyway? Looking at our stories, one might get the impression that the answer differs greatly from culture to culture and from one age to the other. But what if underlining these differences lied even greater similarities? And what if, by connecting these similarities together, we end up with one single story? A story of a journey that takes the hero away from his homeland and into a surreal world of adventure, where he will find an old magician who will help him overcome impossible odds until the hero will return back to his homeland with a treasure and reclaim his throne. And what if we try to reenact this journey through one of its best incarnations, the story of Jason and the Argonauts, using the wisdom of one of the most beloved scholars of myth in the 20th century, Joseph Campbell. Campbell wrote his famous book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, in 1949, the year my father was born, which now seems like a long time ago. Yet his words are as powerful as ever, because what Campbell claimed to be the basic pattern underlining all hero stories, he also showed to be the story of our lives. Yes, our somewhat banal and often boring lives of 9-to-5 office work and TV shows. Because everyone is a hero at his birth, Campbell said, almost astonished at his own words. From the liquid paradise of our mother's womb and into this vale of tears, where we so often find ourselves lost, fallen, and desperate to connect with an ultimate reality. And it's from here that, according to Campbell, each one of us must undergo another journey, a hero's journey that will not only redeem his life, but also that of his community, his tribe or race or whatever is understood throughout the ages. Back in ancient Greece, and before Odysseus began his famous journey back to Ithaca, another sailor gathered the most celebrated warriors of his country and began his journey to what must have been the other side of the world, a place called Colchis in the Black Sea, where a great treasure, the Golden Fleece, taken from a magical ram that was sent by Zeus, still hanged from an oak tree guarded by a dragon. And according to Campbell, this journey, known as the Argonautic expedition, goes across not only the far edges of Greek geography, but of our own psyche, our soul, in search of a treasure that lies deep in here. The hero's journey is traced in a circle, for the hero's task is not only to leave his place of birth and seek adventure, but to return back with a glorious treasure. Often, we find that our hero is born a prince, descended from a noble king, but robbed of his rightful place by a relative. This, according to Campbell, is not random, as deep inside we all feel like we came from somewhere else, from another world perhaps. And he observed that many children will often pass through a phase where they become convinced that their parents are not their real parents. This curious little fact, he argued, was telling of the deep conviction, one that we all share on different levels, that our true being is spiritual, but finds itself in exile and away from its rightful kingdom, the kingdom of our Father. In the case of Jason, it was his uncle who took away his throne, forcing his mother and himself into hiding. There, in the wilderness, the boy would grow into a man and eventually return to reclaim his rightful throne. But his uncle, still in power and eager to keep it, sets for Jason an impossible task: to bring back the Golden Fleece belonging to a ruthless king in faraway Colchis, guarded no less by a fearsome dragon that never sleeps. It doesn't take a theologian to recognize here a trace of the Garden of Eden. But perhaps it takes one to remind us that two were the forbidden trees in that heavenly garden. One, from which the firstborn ate against the will of God, was the tree of knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil, of duality, of separation, which brought us here into this earthly exile. The other, however, was the tree of immortal life, symbolized here by the Golden Fleece, that much like the Holy Grail represents an ultimate object, what Psychonaut Terence McKenna called the transcendental object at the end of time. The journey, of course, would be almost impossible and was in fact designed to send Jason to his death. But heroes are never without companions, and just like young Arthur found his knights, Jason would call on the best heroes of ancient Greece, who would answer his call to adventure. Hercules arrives to join the crew, and so does Orpheus, the mythic lyre player. The two sons of Boreas, the north wind, who are endowed with the gift of flight. Peleus, the father of Achilles, also joins, along with Telamon, who would father mighty Ajax. The ship from which the voyage took its name was called Argo, built with the guidance of Athena, goddess of craft, to withstand the most perilous waters. And its sailors would become the Argonauts. Hearing some of their names like that of Achilles' father Peleus, and while Campbell stressed that stories like this one do not happen in our historical time, but in a mythic time all their own, we understand that, at least for the Greeks, this voyage took place just before the War of Troy. The heroes pour tributes to the gods and push the mighty vessel Argo into the sea, their moves coordinated by the music of Orpheus, who sings of the beginnings of the world. Clearly, we are in ritual space here, and faraway Colchis lies as much on the edge of the Black Sea as it does in the farthest reaches of our inner space. Campbell observed that once the hero leaves his known world, he enters a magical one where the true adventure begins. But before, he must first cross a threshold somewhere between these two. This threshold is the last attempt of his community to hold him back, to bind him into their world of everydayness and away from his true calling. In our life, this might take the form of a job offered to us by one of our relatives, or even a marriage that will bind us forever into what we already know. For Jason, this was the island of Limnos, where he disembarked with his Argonauts on his way to the Straits of the Bosporus. Limnos, however, was no ordinary island, but one with a dark secret. During reconnaissance, one of Argo's sailors could see no man walking the city, but only women, both young and old, while a queen, Ipsipili, meaning high gate, sat on the island's throne. The secret will soon be revealed, as the women had killed their husbands, together with every male child, and after the men had dared to replace them with slaves taken from a raid. Jason, as a hero does, is not dismayed and decides to go and meet the queen in person, dressed, of course, as a king. And so, the poet says, Jason wears an embroidered cloak with all the symbols of this sexual drama, where Eros and Thanatos meet as Aphrodite, goddess of sexual desire, is depicted, holding in her slender right hand the shield of her lover, Ares, god of war, while her dress has slipped from her right shoulder, exposing her soft breast, white as milk, that is seen reflected from the inside on the hard metal of Ares' shield. Meanwhile, the queen, and as we understand for the first time after the atrocious murder, is advised by an old lady to change her mind and take in the newcomers. Our daughters, she says, are watching their hair turn gray without ever knowing the love of a man or child. Who is going to take care of them when their arms are too weary to stir the plow and sow the earth? Through the dark sky of night, the poet tells, shines a red star, one that young girls know to look for through the comely windows of their houses, one that brings memories of lovers who are now far away, strangers among strange lands. And this is how Jason appeared in his shimmering red cloak as he walked towards the queen, and she opened the high gates of Limnos for the Argonauts to come through and live among the women. The curse was lifted and the island rejoiced. We must put ourselves into the shoes or perhaps beds of these young sailors, weary from traveling and eager for a home, only to find themselves made kings and guardians of a small island all their own. But if that was all it took for a journey, these sailors would not be much of a hero. The true kingdom lies unclaimed and the treasure still unconquered. So what happens next? You need to stay tuned for the second part of this heroic journey to find out. Have you ever noticed how, once you make up your mind to leave home and seek your fortunes elsewhere, the opportunity that you've been waiting for all along suddenly appears? It could be a woman, it could be a man, it could be a job, but for years on end, nothing seemed to work until you finally decided to leave it all behind. And just then, does this mean you should cancel your journey? What if this is but a test, and a hero's test at that? Well, following where we left off in our previous episode, Jason and the Argonauts have just stumbled on this dilemma. Their aim was to sail as far as the edge of their known world to a place called Colchis, where a great treasure, the Golden Fleece, was lying in the keep of a dragon. But soon after they departed, the heroes found themselves in the warm embraces of the woman of Limnos, who, in a fit of jealous rage, had killed their treacherous husbands, only to discover loneliness. Until, that is, Jason kept sailing past their island together with his brave companions, charming the island queen and settling there. And for Joseph Campbell, our guide on this hero's journey, this point of indecision is one of the most crucial, because while the worst is yet to come, he observes how everyday man is not only content, but proud to keep himself in the bounds of his culture. In the archetypal pattern that Campbell discovered in all mythologies, this is the point of the first threshold, the point between two worlds, the known and the unknown, where the real adventure takes place. It's the point that Sam the Hobbit discovered quite early and during the first part of The Lord of the Rings, when only a few moments after he began his journey, and staring at the ground, he tells Frodo that if I take one more step, I'll be the furthest away from home I've ever been. But heroes are not your everyday man. And luckily for us, Jason was not one to be seduced by comfort. Like the bees, the poet says, who leave their hives inside the rocks and fly buzzing on lush meadows, sucking the juices of one flower here and then another there. So did the women of Limnos walk the heroes to the shore, saying their last farewells. Jason kissed the queen goodbye and jumped on board of his ship, the mighty Argo, crafted with the guidance of goddess Athena, goddess of crafts, sailing away from the sea-soaked rock of Limnos. The Argonauts rowed across the Aegean till they crossed the Dardanelles, and from there into the Sea of Marmara. Throughout his work, Campbell made it abundantly clear that heroes don't just overcome difficult odds, they overcome impossible ones. And the only way to do so is to get help. This help is not given to just about anyone, however, but only comes after the hero passes the first threshold, the one of homely comforts. For the few that pass through, this stage is followed by that of the magical helper, a wise old man or woman that will appear in the form of a sage, a hermit, a witch, or, as we hear from the poets of Islam, a genie. What these figures represent, Campbell explains, is the benign, protecting power of destiny, a destiny that in the hero's journey only manifests after the hero has made the heroic decision to leave everything behind. The wise helper will advise the hero on their journey, complementing their courage and strength with insight and wisdom. In the story of the Argonauts, this man was Phineas, an old seer punished by Zeus for misusing his power of prophecy by revealing everything to everyone. And for this, the king of the gods sent him the Harpies, terrible creatures, half women and half birds, who appear suddenly like the storm and steal the food from Phineas' table, leaving behind them a terrible stench. Old, dirty and poor, starving and in despair, Phineas passed his days waiting for deliverance. Luckily for him, the Argonauts were looking for his help, and crossing the Dardanelles, the straits separating Greece from Asia, they sailed to his lands. With whatever food he had left, Phineas set up a table and invited his new guests. But as soon as he stretched to touch it, the Harpies came flying out of nowhere, tearing the meat with their dirty claws and beaks, flying off, leaving behind them a terrible stench. The two sons of Boreas, the north wind, took off in hot pursuit, flying over the sea just like their father had taught them. Using their great speed, they soon caught up with the Harpies and drew their swords ready to strike. But at that moment, Zeus intervened to save his monsters that he had sent himself, his faithful bitches, as the poet says, promising that he would harm the old seer Phineas no longer. With that promise, and so as not to anger the father of the gods, the sons of the north wind withdrew, and the Harpies flew south towards Crete, where they hid inside of a cave, where some believe they still reside. Phineas was saved, and grateful for his deliverance, used his gift of prophecy to foretell the perils that still lied ahead. Careful, however, not to overuse his powers, hiding some of the things that he saw. But even counting what the prophet revealed, the prospects for the Argonauts were not looking as good. Lying ahead, they had to pass through the narrow straits of the thrashing rocks that smashed against each other, rocks that no sailor had ever passed through before. Then they would sail near the uncharted lands of the Halives, somber men who dig the rocks for iron. Then through the land of the Amazons, the wild maidens, daughter of Ares, the war god, and finally to Colchis, where the savage king Aeetes holds the Golden Fleece, and where the real danger begins. Luckily for the sailors, the prophet had some advice to give, but not all the advice, remember, as not to anger Zeus again. He tells them to capture a white dove, and then, when they near the thrashing rocks, to release it. If the bird passes through, then, by rowing at exactly the bird's speed, they should, in theory, also pass through the rocks. Modern historians have assumed these rocks to be the Straits of the Bosporus, a difficult passage to this day. For Campbell, however, symbols like this one are murdered when interpreted as mere geography, as what they truly signify are clues to the spiritual potential of human life, a potential that mostly lies fragmented, as most of us live in a world of duality, where existence is split in pairs of opposites, life versus death, good versus evil, desire versus duty. But during the heights of their ecstasies, mystics and psychonauts alike report visions that move them beyond duality, where these pairs of opposites meet and form a unified whole. And according to Campbell, within us lies the center that unites our being with that of the larger world. And to find it, we must go beyond the thrashing rocks of duality. And that's exactly what the heroes do. Go beyond. And so, after offering the proper tributes to the gods, Jason and his Argonauts depart once more towards the stage that Campbell calls challenges and temptations. Nearing the straits, their rowing slows to a stop and their hearts begin to beat as the heroes watch the two giant rocks move towards each other, hitting the wild sea foaming around them. The dove is released and flies darting through the narrow passage. The rocks begin to close around it. The bird flies quicker, sensing its impending doom, and it disappears behind the rocks that crash against each other with a great clasp of thunder. But as they slowly open up again, the dove is seen flying on the other side. It has made it. Only a few feathers from its tail were clipped at the last moment. The sailors row at top speed, trying to mimic the bird's wings. At the last moment, a tide comes from the opening on the other side, pushing them backwards. They row even faster as the rocks come closing in. And just like the bird, the ship's stern is caught, broken wood scattering on the foam. But the ship has made it. Sailing across the Bosporus, the Argonauts threw their anchors at the mouth of a great river flowing from the islands of Amazonia, the island of the warlike maidens, daughter of Ares, who live scattered in 3 tribes. These female warriors are notorious man-haters, but Phineas, the prophet, had foreseen that if the sailors stay for only a single night, nothing will harm them. And so they do exactly that. The next day, they set their sail towards the east once more, and a few days later, they find themselves at their destination, Colchis, where the most dangerous part of their adventure begins. In life, most transformations happen only after we show a willingness to face our fears, the worst of which, of course, lies deep in our subconscious. That is probably why in myths we so often encounter the image of a descent, a katavasis, physical as well as spiritual. In the story of Jason and the Argonauts, this descent happens as they symbolically enter an ancient world. Ancient, that is, by ancient standards. A world that pre-existed the Greeks and their warrior virtues we hear exalted in classical legends. A world of feminine powers where a great mother goddess representing the earth once stood supreme, worshipped as the center of creation, while the blood from the sacrifice of a divine bull flowed downwards to renew the earth's fertility. In Greece, such a culture can be found in Minoan Crete, a culture that flourished about 1,000 years before the Greeks could sing the stories of their heroes. Jason did not sail to Crete, of course, but to a place called Colchis in the Black Sea. But that is little more than a detail, because legends work not on a geography that is physical, but on one that is internal, a geography where Crete, with its great mother goddess and ritual bullfights, can be seen almost as a symbol of the deep unconscious, the real place where the hero must descend to get the ultimate treasure, the Golden Fleece. Come now, Erato, stand beside me and tell me how Jason brought the fleece back to his native lands with the help of love-struck Medea. You, after all, are experts in seducing young maidens, from where you took your name. So begins the third book of the Argonautica, the story of Jason's hero's journey, where the poet, who opened his story with an invocation to Apollo, god of music and poetry, switches alliances midway to ask the help of another, Erato, the muse of erotic poetry. Because what started as an epic will soon turn into a love story, one between Jason, leader of the Argonauts, and Medea, a young witch of sorts, priestess of the dark goddess Hecate, as well as the princess of Colchis, the faraway land where the sailors have just arrived after many trials. Their objective is the Golden Fleece, held by a ruthless king, Aeetes, who is mostly unwelcome to strangers. And so, vastly outnumbered, the heroes stay hidden in marshland near the mouth of a river, not knowing what to do. Luckily for them, someone catches their sight from above. Hera, queen of the gods, who together with Athena, protector of heroes, devise a plan to make the king's daughter fall desperately in love with Jason, as she is the only one who could assist them at getting the fleece from her father using her magical powers. But since neither of these goddesses is an expert in matters of love, they seek the help of another, Aphrodite, who reluctantly agrees and asks her son, Eros, represented as an unruly rat who constantly put his mother in trouble, to go down to earth and shoot his arrows of desire straight into Medea's heart. Cupid, the winged god of love, flies from Mount Olympus and into the sky, from where he sees the fruits-bearing earth and the cities of men scattered in its vastness, and among them, Jason's ship, stuck inside the marsh, its sailors troubled by the burden of their fate. Down on earth and being totally unaware of what just happened up in heaven, the heroes decide, with heavy hearts, to allow Jason to attempt a difficult bargain with the king. In exchange for the Golden Fleece, he will say, Jason and his crew offer to subdue the fierce tribes of the Sarmatians, who are still unloyal to the king. Jason presents himself in front of the entire court, which includes a rather indifferent Medea, and delivers his speech to the king, whose royal brow seems as unconvinced as ever. But just then, Eros springs from under Jason's feet and shoots his arrow straight into Medea's chest, piercing her heart, which lights up with the flame of love, that sweetness mixed with pain. But King Aeetes, who is unaware of what just happened, has something else in store. He will give the Golden Fleece, he says, to whoever accomplishes the following task, which apparently he himself can do every day before breakfast. The hero must tame a pair of flame-breathing oxen, divine bulls with bronze feet and snouts of fire, put them under a huge yoke of solid iron, and with them plow an enormous field. Then, on that same field, the hero is to sow the teeth of a dragon, from where a race of warriors will come springing out from the ground, ready to attack anyone in sight, the first, of course, being whoever planted the crop. If Jason can perform these tasks and come out alive, then, and only then, will King Aeetes give up his Golden Fleece. Jason's heart sinks deep in his chest in despair, yet he has no choice but to accept, and with his head hanging low, he goes back to his ship and tells his mates what just happened. But as we already know, so much more happened than met the king's eye. And during that same night, Medea is lying tormented in her bed. Half awake, she sees a dream where it was revealed that Jason had not come to Colchis for the fleece, but for her, and that she, using her witchcraft, managed to subdue the fiery oxen of her father and save her beloved hero. For she was a temple priestess, after all, of the dark goddess Hecate, and the poet tells us that she knew all the herbs that grow out of the fruit-bearing earth. But what is a witch doing in a Greek story? Joseph Campbell was not the first to notice that most Greek myths appear to have been stitched together by the fusion of two separate systems of belief. On one layer, a hero like Jason is typical of the stories found across the Indo-Europeans, the Aryans, as they were once called before the Second World War, the warrior tribes that came out of the Eurasian steppes around the second millennia BC to conquer most of Europe, reaching as far as India, and from whom Germans, Celts, and Greeks alike descend. It was they who brought the thunder gods, Zeus, Wotan, or Odin, together with a number of male heroes who were imagined to conquer lands as they conquered women. But way before these blonde barbarians came down from their steppes, there existed in Europe and the Near East an entire matrix of earth-worshipping, female-centered cultures whose supreme god was not a he, but a she, a great mother goddess whose body was the earth and whose sacred animal was the bull, just like we see in the beautiful paintings of Minoan Crete. In the love story between Jason and Medea, therefore, we not only find two star-struck lovers, but two entire cultures. A sky-worshipping, male-dominant one, represented by Jason, and a chthonic, earth-oriented, female-dominant, represented by Medea. And since history is written by the victors, heroes like Jason became the norm of classical antiquity, while this second Minoan layer was suppressed, but never disappeared entirely. So, one way to understand what is happening is to imagine that Jason's journey takes him not outwards into space, but inwards and into the deep collective psyche of ancient Greece, a culture built on two distinct layers, one Aryan and more dominant, while the other Minoan, pushed down into a lower level of consciousness, into which the hero must now descend. Carrying an entire culture, wow, that must have been one heavy burden on the shoulders of young Medea, who lied tormented in bed. What was she to do? On one hand, she was the king's daughter, and helping Jason meant betraying her father. But then again, how could she witness her beloved hero die, burnt no less by the fire-breathing bulls? Torn in two, she thinks of killing herself and even pulls out her potions ready to drink. But then her mind drifts towards the sun and the sweet pleasures a young girl dreams of, and decides to help. When Father Zeus gave animals their weapons, wings and claws to the birds, speed and cunning to horse and fox, respectively, he left nothing for us humans. And so, without fur and natural weapons, our race was slowly dying. Until, that is, a titan, Prometheus, stole fire from the gods and brought it down to earth. Zeus, enraged, punished Prometheus by tying him on a rock in the Caucasus, while two eagles tore his immortal flesh by day, letting it heal by night, so they could start again for an eternity. From the blood drops that fell from his open wound grew a plant that makes one impenetrable to weapons for a single day. That was the plant Medea pulled with both hands out of the dark earth, the Titan crying on his rock in agony as if he felt the roots being uplifted from his own guts. That same night, Medea sent for Jason, lying to her maids by saying that she planned to trick the hero by giving him a deadly poison. Yet it was they who got tricked, and together the whole palace. Waiting anxiously in her temple, Medea sees Jason coming from afar, like the star, the poet says, that rises as if straight out from the dark ocean. At that moment, Medea could have torn the heart out of her breasts and given it to him, but she only gave him the plant and the sacred ritual that he needed to perform in order to use it, asking nothing in return but for Jason to remember her. When the sun rose the next day, Jason presented himself to the king with his comrades on his side. The whole palace was present, and the king was eager to see his demise. Jason was ready, and as the bulls charged straight, breathing fire, Jason held up his shield, his skin protected by Medea's potion that also gave him the strength to pull one of the beasts by its horns and force its mighty head to the ground, where he placed the iron yoke, pulling the other in its turn. After the field was plowed, Jason sowed the dragon's teeth, but following Medea's advice, he hid in the nearby bushes. As the demon warriors rose from the ground, Jason threw a stone in their midst. Mindless, mistaking the stone for an attacker, they threw themselves to one another, slaying each other, until Jason leaped up with his sword and finished the job. The hero was victorious, finally. But wait, what about the Golden Fleece? There is one important difference between myths and fairy tales, one that Joseph Campbell makes abundantly clear. Because while the basic structure of the hero's journey, the universal pattern that Campbell discovered, can be seen underlining both, the end goals of these two genres are very different in scale. Fairy tales are essentially myths of maturity, where boys and girls transform into men and women respectively, which is why so many of them end with a marriage. The gift that is bestowed to the hero at the end of fairy tales is the gift of maturity, achieved through a kind of second birth, where the boy must die for the man to be born. But in myths, the gift that the hero achieves extends far beyond his own life. It's a transcendent or ultimate gift, an object of such power it can heal the entire world, which is why these gifts are so often depicted by objects that symbolize wholeness, magical rings, holy chalices, or in the case of Jason and the Argonauts, a golden fleece, where gold, the only metal that doesn't oxidize, stands for the immortal substance. And to achieve the gift of wholeness, our hero had to pass through the rocks of duality, which are the fragments of our existence. From there, he descended to the collective unconscious of Greece, a world of witches and bullfights reminiscent of Minoan Crete. And down there, in the world of adventure, Campbell says the hero must conclude his journey in a sacred marriage with the great goddess herself. But first, the fleece. Jason had done it. He had just completed the most challenging task of his life, to yoke the bronze-legged fire-breathing bulls of King Aeetes, harvest a huge plot of land, sow the teeth of a dragon, and kill the demon warriors that came springing from the ground. And it would have never been achieved without the help of young Medea, the princess who went against the wishes of her father, who wanted nothing more than to see Jason burn from the breath of his bulls, or cut down by the warriors that came out of the ground. But neither of these happened, as Jason was protected by the magical potion given to him in secret by the love-struck princess. Only the night before, Medea had promised her maids that she would give Jason a poison, but now her secret was revealed for all to see. The king, known for his ruthlessness, would not have spared her, and so, in the middle of the night, Medea cuts one of her beautiful locks, a symbolic end to her maidenhood, and escapes from the palace, reaching Jason's ships by nightfall, asking the hero to take her with him. And she has one more gift to give them. Jason may have triumphed, but he is still missing the Golden Fleece, the purpose of his journey. The fleece, no less, was guarded by a terrible dragon who had defeated all heroes that came before him. Medea could help, as this priestess of Hecate knew all herbs that came out of the fruit-bearing earth, and one that could put the dragon to sleep. Jason, who was glad to see her anyway, agrees to take her with him. At dawn, they sailed to the place where the golden ram sent by Zeus had been sacrificed back to the father of the gods so many years before. From the little temple near the shore, they took a path into the sacred grove and to the giant oak tree where the fleece lied hanging, shimmering in golden hues reflecting throughout the dark forest. Suddenly, from afar, a terrible hiss was heard across long riverbanks and endless forest that resounded throughout Colchis till it reached the Rione of Georgia and the Aras of Armenia, the two great rivers that flow from the Caucasus and into the Black Sea. Then came the dragon. There is no image more familiar in mythology than that of a hero who kills a dragon, steals its treasure, and marries a princess. But what does it mean? Well, remember that day when you learned that you are going to die for the first time? I sure do. I must have been around 5, and if memory serves, it was one of the worst days of my life thus far. Talking about it with my friends, I learned that I was not alone. Many of you could relate also. But if that's the case, then what did we think before exactly? That we were immortal? Well, according to Campbell, almost. Because for him, we come into this world almost as gods, having no idea about what it's all about. As we gain this precious knowledge, we also gain the tragic knowledge that one day we too shall die. But what if there was a way back? Campbell believed that there is, and the reason why myths, he said, sound childish is only because they have retained within them a secret that only children know, that we're not exactly from here. What is lost in childhood, the secret of immortality, is regained in myth during the peak of the hero's journey, where the hero finally steals a great treasure, an ultimate object, often made of gold, the immortal metal, which in fact is not made out of any earthly substance. It's what Terence McKenna describes so poetically as the transcendental object at the end of time. How much of that is literally true, and whether after death, as the great poet Wilfred Owen said, our soul lies shaded by the shaking of great wings, high-pillowed on calm pillows of God's making, or whether yet this thin and sodden head confuses more and more with a low mold, is impossible to know. Yet the image of immortality, the Golden Fleece, is in us all, and perhaps it's there for a reason. But now the dragon approaches, like the black smoke, the poet says, that rises above forest in great fires, in dark and twisted rings. So did the snake coiled its scale-ridden body on the sacred oak, ready to strike. Medea called the ancient spells of her goddess, the night-walking queen Hecate. And now you'll know why Campbell was not popular among Christians, because in images like this one, he had no problem reading the return to Eden. The sacred oak, the Greek dris, is the tree of immortal life, the second of the 2 forbidden trees described in Genesis that were found in the Garden of Eden. And just like in the Bible, so in the story of the Argonauts, the snake is still guarding the tree. But in contrast, woman, instead of tempting man, now guides him back to its treasure. The monster tries to hold its head above the earth, desiring nothing but to close both Jason and Medea inside. But slowly it falls into a deep slumber. Jason runs up to the tree and steals the Golden Fleece, the fleece of immortality, calling on Medea to follow him while both ran back to his ships. The sun had risen and the heroes took off the shores of Colchis, never to return. Their task seemed complete. But wait, not so fast. Because for the heroes can return home with their treasure, Campbell tells us they will first be hunted down by those who want the secrets of Eden back in the garden, and through a stage he identified as the magical escape. Because by now, Medea's shameful love had become the talk of an entire city. The king, enraged, sent his son, Medea's brother, with the best of his ships in pursuit of Jason and the Argonauts. The heroes soon realized they won't have enough time to trace their journey back from where they came, and will soon be caught. At the ocean's edge, there is a river, wide and deep enough for a ship to cross. Its mouth splits in two just before joining the sea, and some believe it comes from the Ripea Ori, the Urals. The Greeks called it Istros, while we call it the Danube. Through this mouth, with the enemy fleet closing in behind them, Jason sails his ship, the mighty Argo, near nightfall, and just a few miles behind the Argo, Medea's brother receives a message. His sister wants to meet him in secret and plead for mercy. He agrees, thinking that words can change her mind, and hopes that he can bring her home back alive. But oh, love, you great destroyer, may you now turn your weapons against my own enemies, since Medea's mind you have already conquered. The poet laments, as the two lovers had devised a plan. And just as Medea's brother approaches, Jason leaps from behind and strikes him dead with his sword. They both run back to their ship and take off. Through the Cronian Sea, the Adriatic, and down to the island of the Phaeacians, where the good king of the island will accept them as guests. Upon learning of their crime, however, Medea's murdered brother, the king gives them an ultimatum. Since Medea is still unmarried, she is technically kidnapped and therefore must be returned back to her father. But if she were married, then the king of the Phaeacians and any island of Greece would accept them. And so it is done, because unsurprisingly for a myth, this too ends with a marriage. And so, as the sun rises from the sea, the island is aroused in great festival. The men mix water with wine and bring the sacrificial animals, while the women gather to arrange the wedding bed inside of a sacred grove where Zeus himself was raised when still a child, fed with immortal honey. And on this bed they throw, of course, the Golden Fleece, where the marriage was consummated that same night. As Campbell would explain to us, this was no ordinary marriage, but a sacred one. And he even uses the Greek phrase hieros gamos, or hierogamy, to signify this mythological event where the hero unites with a goddess. Remember what we said in the previous episode, that Medea's image, her connection with the earthly realm through the dark goddess Hecate, her association with bull and snake, so typical of pre-Indo-European Greece, present her as an image of the great mother goddess. The union that Jason achieves is the seal of his achievement, a symbolic return back to the womb, out of which we came with a knowledge of immortality. And it's also the union of Aryan and Minoan, from which Greece was born. I would like to say that our heroes lived happily ever after, but whoever knew the name Medea before our story even began might have suspected otherwise. Because you see, the Great Mother is not easily tamed by the male-oriented world we live in, and in time, she might wreak her revenge. But this, as you might have also suspected, is a story for another time.